Holla ballers, what's going on? It's Mike. And yeah, single target DPS. We do not balance around single target DPS. In fact, it's not the only consideration. Recent blue tweet regarding specifically Shadow Priest. So I've just jumped into an LFR to get some Shadow Priest stuff for you. It's an interesting idea, isn't it? Especially with Warlords of Draenor coming up, because this is how your classes are designed. New expansion means big changes. No doubt about that. And then the revelation, so a lot of people, something a lot of us have known for a while, is that Blizz doesn't balance you around the idea of a single target DPS. Is that a good thing? Do we like that? Again, this is not a black and white issue. Something I've been trying to drill into a lot of you recently is not many things are black and white. We can't just say one is better than the other. But do we agree with this stance that we don't balance simply around single target DPS? We take many other things into account when deciding what your damage should be. Because it's as simple as that. This is how much damage your class is capable of, and we have designed it around that idea. We want this class to do this amount of damage in single target, this amount of damage in AoE situations, and in the other variables in there, such as are there 2 things alive, are there 3 things alive, are there other things going on in the fight, and then also they take into account utility. What do you bring to the raid? Shadow Priest. This is kind of like the one we need to think about, because of course there are other classes that are affected by this. Moonkins were the historically nightmare class for Blizzard. Their dots back in Cataclysm did so much damage that in fact you could leave the Moonkins to simply AoE everything down while you carried on single targeting. This created benefits for the raid. The bosses actually died quicker because instead of everybody shifting their DPS to other targets, we simply just said, hey Moonkins, go and do what you do best, which is just dot the fuck out of everything. Sinestra, classic example of where the Moonkins would just go off and just dot everything with Sunfires and just laugh hysterically as everything died, and they were doing somewhere in the region of 70k DPS, which at the time, it was pretty astonishing. So, there's a couple of things we need to talk about here. First of all, the big issue. Is it right to balance a class not around single target DPS? My personal thoughts on this? Absolutely fucking not. Because no matter how much you say, yeah, but you do really good AoE damage or you bring a certain amount of healing, there's something we can all agree on. In any boss encounter, one thing remains the same. There's a boss. Right? There's a boss. Now, the only times I can think of that doesn't happen is just healer-specific fights, like Valithria Dreamwalker, if I pronounce her name correctly. In which case, nobody gives a shit about their DPS at all. It's an irrelevant subject. But any other encounter, we can all agree on one particular thing, is that there is definitely going to be a boss of some kind. Can we count on there being AoE, and certainly enough to warrant our apparently balanced around AoE damage? We can't guarantee that. We certainly can't. In fact, as the community put it in these blue tweets, is we simply as a Shadow Priest have 2 good fights, 10 really bad ones, and 2 completely unplayable ones. And by unplayable, what we're saying is we are just useless. We are so easily replaced that it is pointless bringing Shadow Priest to this fight. Absolute waste of time. In fact, justifiably, for a good progress raid, maybe we're going to bring them to 2 fights. But if we have the option to replace them, we're going to replace them for 12 fights. That's not a nice situation to be in. Blizzard's response to this is, oh, that's kind of fluff, right? That's like a very high-end sort of approach. That's what the top guilds will do. Realistically, you have 3 great fights, 2 bad ones, 9 average. And in fact, they go on to say and justify it that your single target as a Shadow Priest is low average. But if the numbers align, and this is what really gets me a little bit, if the numbers align and you have fortune favouring the bold, then you will actually have really high potential. And then they say, oh, Shadow is a deceptively hard to play optimally class. Kind of, yeah, we all make mistakes there. There's a lot of tweaks we can do with dot strengths and whatnot to really kind of push our damage that little bit higher. Is that fair? No, certainly not when we compare to something like a Warlock, who has the ability to sit on his high damage potential. If you look at a Destruction Warlock, he can sit with his embers until the stars align. He's not forced to do his thing anytime, anywhere, and hope the stars align. In the situation of a Warlock, he can quite happily wait until the stars align. Mages, kind of similar. We can do sort of similar things until the stars align, and then we can blow shit up, and it doesn't actually affect the rest of our play at all. Really unfair attitude. Really unfair. And we can't rely on every single fight to work to our favour. In fact, in the terms of the Shadow Priest this time, it works very much against our favour. And as Warlords of Draenor comes up and all our classes are going to be smashed in the teeth in some fashion, we have to expect that some classes are going to realistically fall back into this trap. But the Shadow Priest has a particular problem. A problem that not really everybody else has. It's not a problem that the Druids have, despite they have access to 4 different specs. It's not really a problem the Shamans have, because they have access to 2 different types of specs. That's right, a damage and a healer. Same with the Warriors, same with everyone else, pretty much. But the Shadow Priests, they have a particular problem. They only have one style of doing damage. Their other 2 specs are both healer specs. They only have one particular style that is a DPS spec, and that is the Shadow Priest. You are pigeonholed into that. If you want to be a priest doing damage, you are Shadow or you are nothing. You better get out. So is it fair that you're saying that, well, we haven't really balanced around this fight, and yeah, we realise you've got low single target damage, high potential, in theory, but, you know, you kind of bring in more utility, usually in the form of healing, usually in the form of being able to soak things with dispersion, which other classes simply do better. You bring extra amounts of healing, which other classes simply do better. I don't like it. I really don't like it. I think it's really unfair because we don't have a choice as a Shadow Priest. It's not like a rogue who we can say, you know what really works well here? I could actually go sub like we did in the recent rogue guides and I can provide so much utility, sure, for slightly less damage, but now I'm a one-man army and I'm going doing my job. Oh, you want me to cope with this fight which has lots of adds? Let me just swap over to combat. Oh, we're doing a lot of single target damage here. I'll swip over to mutilate. Shadow Priests don't have that choice, do they? No, they don't. Similar with DKs. DKs are always always having a great time. Oh, need really burst AoE? Well, I can drop some fucking howling blasts all over this son of a bitch, and I'm going to have a good old time. Oh, I want to do really consistent DPS? No, let me drop either Frost single target, or let me just go Unholy, and I'm going to have a whale of a time as well. Shadow Priests don't have that choice. They do not have that opportunity. Similar with the Shamans. Is it a ranged, beneficial fight? We've seen plenty of those, right? We've seen lots of fights where, in fact, being ranged is an absolute glory under the sun. Let me just go over to Elemental. Not too hard to do these days is to swap over to a different spec. I can gear it, actually, pretty damn quickly, if needs be. Sure, I might prefer Enhancement, but I can swap vice versa as and when the game decides, or when your design around the bosses actually dictates that I'm better here. Some classic examples. The Ascendant Council. For world first kill. Only 1 melee. 1 melee. Picture that. How many classes then decided to swap over to their ranged opportunity? What choices do a Shadow Priest have? When it's an AoE heavy fight, no choice at all. I've got to stick with what I'm given. What if it's a heavy single target fight like Malkoriak or whatever he's called? Malkorak. What about if I do that? Well, I've still got to stick with the same tools. I don't really have the choices. I have no opportunity to change anything other than what you have given me, and what you have given me is not working out too well. Because there is always going to be a boss, we need that single target damage. Of course we do, because there are many, many occasions when it's going to come down to the last few percent on that boss, and being the class that doesn't bring a solid single target damage ain't going to benefit the raid that much. If we have to really work on the execute phase of the fight, the last 20%, the tough part, have we seen on many, many fights, when we look at things like Paragons of the Klaxi, when we get down to that last Paragon, we're not bothered about your AoE damage at that point. What we need is good, solid, single target DPS in order to bring this motherfucker to his knees. Same with Garrosh Hellscream, when we get down to that last fight and we're kiting those fucking Iron Stars. What we want is the good single target damage. When the real blood and thunder of a fight comes down to it, it's the single target damage every single time. Very, very rarely do we look at somebody who can bring huge AoE and say, we need this guy or else. It has happened. Don't get me wrong, it has happened. Halfus Wormbreaker, 10-man heroic. We needed those Demonology Warlocks. They were better than the Shadow Priests every single day of the week, because no matter how much you try and rebalance this, what we can't do is ensure that Shadow Priests have insane AoE all the time. It just doesn't work that way. At certain points, it doesn't happen. But then we can always get the Warlocks to switch over if needs be, and they do the job better. Because they have the choice. That's the point. They have the choice. The Shadow Priest doesn't have a choice. He has no opportunity to change around. And what if we start seeing this with other classes? If you say my spec has weak AoE, you probably have a choice in what to do. If your class has a weak single target, you probably have a choice in what to do. I'll switch over to this spec for this fight because we need that crucial execute phase single target DPS, or we need to beat this certain timer in order to cause a transition. Very, very rare occasions has anybody turned around and said, but bro, I've got Void Shift. Bro, you need my Halo. Has anybody said that? Has anybody said that? Hey, my DPS might not work in that crucial final phase. It might not happen. Sure, I've got my Shadow Word Death, but overall my DPS is sucking balls. But I'm bringing a Halo. So there's that going for me, which is pretty cool. Not really happened. I really dislike the idea that we're not balanced around the single target DPS, or that any class isn't. The single target DPS must be the most crucial. It must be. It must be at least a good 80% of what this class is bringing to the table, because ultimately that boss is always going to be standing in front of you, and that's the guy that needs to die. Everybody can contribute in some fashion to AoE, or they can contribute to healing, in fact more so than ever in Mists of Pandaria, and there's no way that a Shadow Priest or any other class can say single-handedly, I am responsible for bringing all the support to this fight. Because everybody is able to contribute in some fashion if needs be. Your Ferals could drop that tranquility. They can do all this. In fact, they have talents that buff it out the roof. All the elementals and the enhancements can drop those healing rains if needs be. Hell, even the rogues can take less damage and heal themselves for a minor amount if needs be. They can bring the smoke bomb. Shadow Priest ain't bringing that. And nobody's really said we can't do this fight without Halo. We can't do this fight without Divine Star or Cascade. We just can't do it. We need the Shadow Priests. Really unfair attitude, I think. Overall, we have to be taking single target into account. This then brings in the problem of dots. This is where this issue comes from. The problem of dots. Dots too powerful. What we certainly don't want is the playstyle of the class to be changed so dramatically that it no longer counts. A Shadow Priest is a dot class. But those dots don't have to be super powerful. As long as they are a DPS increase, we will use them. As long as it doesn't fall into the same problem that combat rogues have with Rupture and Eviscerate, we will use them. I don't recall in the history of my raiding ever being so angry that somebody got to multi-dot and do a little bit more damage. Did I cry that our Moonkins and Shadow Priests during Valionia and Thoralion were able to double dot and do extra damage? No. If it was a major problem, just nerf the dot and boost things like Wrath and Starfire. Boost our Mind Blast a little bit more and take more off Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Embrace. Vampiric Embrace serves a double purpose as it is. We want it on. Shadow Word Pain can be okay if you just weaken it. What we don't want to see is, oh well, we have to nerf this because if you do Shadow Word Pain on several targets, your damage goes through the roof, which doesn't really happen anyway. It doesn't. There's no excuse for this situation as far as I can see. I've got to say, to read that single target is a factor, but not an overriding factor when deciding a class's DPS, especially a spec that has no other choice in what the hell it can do, I think that is very unfair. Really unfair. I don't think that's right. It's just straight up wrong in my opinion. I really don't like it. I don't want to really be based off my utility if I'm a DPS class. Utility is awesome. Let's not mistake that. Utility is fan-fucking-tastic. If it wasn't for the banners and all that kind of stuff, we wouldn't have even seen DPS warriors until mid-expansion. They wouldn't have existed without the idea of bringing Skull Banner and Demo Banner. They wouldn't have been around. They had such a tough time. But because of their utility, raids brought one. You know what I mean? We don't want to be in that scenario. I don't want to be a player who loves my class, who loves what I bring to the raid, and just sit there and say, basically, I'm here to drop a fucking banner. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be based about my utility. Give me my damage so I'm contributing fully to this raid. And if I bring some utility, all the better. But don't balance me around it. If you're going to give me this tool, that doesn't mean I should be nerfed in the potential damage. But I don't want to look at the damage meter and see myself right at the bottom, but I brought a banner. I don't want that. I want my damage first. I want to be even. I want to be right up there with those guys. And sure, if some fights give me a certain benefit, all the better. Because then you should be making fights that give other classes the benefit. That's how it works. Every class gets a little bit of fun here and there. That's awesome. That's fine. But don't nerf me overall in sake of having those things. That sucks. My opinion, anyway.